They're east of here. Selden, which is airport.
So you're Eve, and you're from?
Selden, New York.
Okay.
30 years.
And what do you do there?
Originally from Iowa. So with this family has come full circle back to Long Island again.
I see.
After all these years.
Okay. Okay, so tell me who you are and where you're from.
I'm Stuart Brush. I'm from Unadilla, New York, and that's about 90 miles southwest of Albany, right on Interstate 88. It's a little town called Sydney and Bainbridge on either side of it. We call it the Tri-County area.
Okay, and what do you do there?
I was an engineer, but I'm retired now, and I just play golf and fly model airplanes.
Okay.
That's all I do.
Going on the computer.
No. And who are you?
I'm Jennifer Kimball Gasparini, and my grandmother was Gladys Brush from outside of Boston, Swampscott, Massachusetts.
And are you a Boston person, Massachusetts?
No, actually I came from St. Paul, Minnesota.
Oh, wow.
My daughter Alicia came with me.
Okay.
And my father, Richard Kimball, is here, and he's the daughter of Brush.
The daughter?
The son. Oh no, we have to erase that. And the doctor.
This is this kind of picture, so you could tell me a little bit about yourselves, if you would.
Let's see. I like Moose Tracks ice cream. Yeah. I like Moose Tracks ice cream.
No, he likes chocolate peanut butter.
I like a hot fudge chocolate marshmallow sundae with nuts, whipped cream, and cherry on the top.
Okay.
And I like all of my Brush relatives.
Okay.
That's why we're here today, because we all get together.
I'm from Delaware.
That's across the Hudson River, too.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to civilization.
Okay. So do you spend a lot of time with working on genealogy?
He has.
Oh, it's taken an enormous amount of time. There's no end to it.
How did you become interested in that?
Because I have always loved history, and I'm fascinated by trying to put things together. It's almost like a jigsaw puzzle, and every once in a while you find something really thrilling, and I found lots of things that are in that category. Yeah.
I understand there's a connection with the Bruces in Scotland. Did you make that connection? There was not? Is there?
No, there is not a connection with the Bruces.
Oh.
But it's in print that there is a connection, and it's never been. It's incorrect. It's never been able to be proved.
Oh.
Our connections are not Scottish but English.
Well, that corrects a notion that I've had for a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. They used to. If you read the introduction of my volume, you'll see that there are 7 sources in the introduction, and some of the sources say that Thomas was from the Bruce clan in Scotland, but not so. We have to go somewhere else.
Okay. Well, it's always nice to have a myth corrected.
That's right.
So.
I think so.
Yes.
We like as much accuracy as we can, and we never put anything in print that is just based on hearsay, but it's all based on the records.
I see. Okay.
Very.
Well, thank you, sir. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Debbie Brush. We live down in western North Carolina where we retire. And the descendant of Richard Brush from Huntington.
Wow.
We're happy to be here with everybody else whose name is Brush too.
Okay.
Okay, I left there when I was 2 years old.
Well, it's right down the main line branches.
Excuse me, I have been asked to announce that people are to be seated in the next 5 minutes. Because we have a little something that we want to take care of before the dinner starts at 7. Okay?
Booth.
Thank you.
And Dennis. I've come from Seoul, Korea. I'm on home leave, visiting the reunion. It took me 22 hours to fly here. Actually, that's enough.
you can do my phone in an airplane. He doesn't remember it, but that's where he's
Yeah,
from.
I grew up in upstate New York. How about you?
Delaware?
In Delaware.
Ted's wife, or
Yes,
Ted? Okay. And you're living where now?
I live in Whitestone, Virginia.
Uh-huh.
It's
That's
a one-stoplight town.
one stoplight town with less than 2,000 people.
The lady over here with
And that's where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
So I've come full circle.
What?
We have to sit down.
It is so amazing to look out here and see all of you. I cannot believe that 2 years of planning have finally come to fruition. It's really wonderful. And I want you to know that this is all my fault. I was the one that had the big idea. And you know how the way we felt doing this. And I figured that it's kind of payback time for all the hours and the years of being a genealogy widow, you know, or widower, as the case may be, walking through endless cemeteries, looking at stones, much like the one that we found in Cambridge, Vermont, that well-known place, you know, Cambridge, Vermont. Umbrella in hand, watching a very large black snake slither across my feet as I was studying a stone in the cemetery. You know what I mean? Okay. Anyway, we think we've done it from A to Z, although there was a lady that told us, oh, you can't possibly do this without me. Anyway, we've tried to think of everything so that you'll have a good time. So I say, because I'm having the first word and it was my idea, let it begin. Okay? Thank you all for being here. It's really wonderful. Amazing. Okay, and I'm turning over the microphone and the festivities to my esteemed husband, who is the writer of the book. Gracious. Emery, that's my grandson.
Well, anyway, here we are, having a good time. Are we having fun yet? Yes, we are. And we want to do some introductions tonight. First of all, we want to say happy birthday to John Brush, because it's his 400th birthday. Is that correct? Okay. And the 350th anniversary, or thereabouts, of the arrival of Thomas and Richard to the New World. And so, let's see. Why don't we just start out by singing Happy Birthday to John, shall we? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John. Happy birthday to you. By the way, I should tell you that if you don't sing, I'm going to preach.
Do it again.
That always gets them singing right away. Right. Well, anyhow, here we are. And it's wonderful to welcome all of you to the homeland of Huntington. I never thought that this event was going to happen. I don't know how we get involved in these horrendously big projects, and somehow or other, you never find anybody else who's really going to do it. And so Laura says, well, we can do that. And so here we are, because somehow or other it happened. We're going to start out with some introductions tonight, and I thought that it might be fun to do it by state. And then after we have our introductions, then we'll have our supper together, okay? Alphabetically, let's see. The first state is like Alabama, but I don't think we have anybody from Alabama. Is there anybody here from any of the states that start with the letter A? Now, let's see. Is anybody going to stand up for the... Nobody's here from any of those. What are there? 4 states that start with A?
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Oh, New Jersey. There's one in every crowd, right? Isn't there one in every crowd? Boy, okay, what, there aren't any states that start with B, are there? How about C? California, we got California, okay. These people are from California, that's the first C state. And why don't you introduce yourselves, all right? Colorado, we want California first. Where's California? Okay, about 5 people, 6 people. Introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, where are you from?
Stuart Brush and my wife Suzanne are from Oakland.
Okay. Who else?
Elaine Brush from Boulder Creek, California.
Oh, we've stayed overnight with you. Who else?
Donna Tetley,
Oh,
San Bernardino, California.
where in California?
Actually, Grand Terrace, but it's near San Bernardino.
Okay. Very good. And Lee?
Oh, I'm Lee Bradford, daughter of Catherine Brush, Burlingame, California.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you, California.
Wait a minute.
Oh, more California.
Al Brush, Modesto, California.
Modesto. And?
Pamela Brush Thomas from Modesto, California.
Oh, sure. Right. Boy, it's wonderful. You know, at one point we had more people signed up from California than we had from New York. And I thought that was really terrific.
Mary and my husband Bob Stanberry from Parker, Colorado, south of Colorado, south of Denver.
Great. And we have more Colorado. All right.
Barbara, 4 seats any place?
Yes, right down here.
And there's 3 right here.
Next after Michigan comes Minnesota. I don't think we have Minnesota, do we? Oh, we do. Terrific. Who's from Minnesota?
Jennifer Gasparini and my daughter Alicia from Woodbury, Minnesota.
Woodbury, Minnesota. Boy, does every state have a Woodbury? It seems that way. All right, what are we ready for? Ohio? Missouri. We don't have anybody from Missouri. Mississippi. We don't have anybody from Mississippi. Montana. Oh, aren't there a lot of M's? And most of them end in a vowel. I never understand. All right, after Montana, now we're ready for the M's in that one. Huh? Nevada. We have Nevada here, don't we, Teresa? Teresa at the registration table is Nevada. Outside of Las Vegas. Nebraska? No. North Dakota? Did we have? New Jersey, yeah, New Jersey. We have a lot of people from New Jersey. Who's New Jersey?
Alabama.
There's one of those in every crowd. We heard from him before.
That's right. Nancy Brush Blakeney. I'm from Lake Apacon, New Jersey. This is my brother Paul Brush. He's from Toms River, New Jersey. His daughter Kim from Toms River, and her daughter Megan, Toms River, New Jersey.
Wow, that's a good collection of folks. Great. Other New Jerseyites? John?
John and Miriam Brush, Mount Holly.
Mount Holly, New Jersey. Oh, back here, the League Pets.
Fred and Doris Westwood from Stone Mountain, New Jersey.
There we go. New Jersey.
Lee Brush and my daughter Kristen from Bud Lake.
Bud Lake. Oh,
All
looking
right.
for you.
There we go. That's New York. We haven't gotten to New York yet. Is that all for New Jersey? Let's hear it for New York. Got a lot of New Yorkers here, right? All right, we'll start here and go around the room. At your table?
I'm Trevor Brush from New York, and my daughter Liz Perla from Minnesota.
All right. And
I'm Faye Brush, and this is my husband Jim.
okay, the Croots over here.
I'm Carolyn Brush,
and my husband Bob, and you stayed with us 20 years ago.
Yeah, we stayed with you in what town? Unadilla. Our son was a student at Hartwick College, and so we went out there for Parents' Weekend, and we stayed with the Brushes. Right. Harry is from New York.
Harry Macy from New York City.
Harry is going to be talking to us tomorrow morning in our program about migrations from Huntington out to wherever you live. So he's a professional genealogist, career worker at the New York Genealogical Biographical Society, and helped us immensely in the writing of our book studying the New York City segment of the Brush family in the late 70s and early 80s. Okay, let's see. Joseph.
Joseph and Harold Brush from Riverhead, Long Island, about a half hour east.
And they brought with them 2 cars. Tell us about the 2 cars you brought.
One brush car.
You brought a car, and then inside your trailer is the second car. It's the brush car, and we weren't able to get it into the ballroom. So, and it's raining out, so tomorrow, when it's not raining out, we're going to break open the brush car out here in the little courtyard, and we'll have a photo opportunity for everybody. And Joe and Carol can tell us about their 1910 brush runabout. Okay? There we go.
I'm Charlie Brush. This is my son, Charles Brush, my daughter-in-law, Diane Brush, and my daughter, Karen Brush.
Good to see you, Uncle Charlie. All right. Charles Francis Brush III and Charles Francis Brush IV. And you all know who Charles Francis Brush I was. Who else? New York. New York, back there.
Cynthia Brush Wiggins. I live in East Newport here in the town of Huntington.
Okay.
Sam Brush, this is my wife Eve. We're from Sheldon, Montana.
Yes, oh, Sam and Evie. Yeah, right, okay. And?
Barbara Brush Atkin Carpenter. My son, Stuart.
Your son, Stuart. Well, he's my namesake. Okay, back here?
Don and Jerry Brush, Kings Park, Long Island, New York.
Kings Park, okay, thank you. And?
Hi, Susan Paula. I'm the granddaughter of Gilbert Brush, and I'm from Ronkonkoma, Long Island.
Yes. Good. And Cheryl. Okay. Fine. Did that take care of New York? Cassandra, you're not from New York. Okay. What's after New York? New Hampshire. Right. We don't have. I think New Hampshire is the only New England state that we do not have. Ohio's next. Okay, Laura wants me to hurry. Okay. North Carolina. Don't push us onto Ohio yet. We have North Carolina with us.
I'm Jim Brush, and my wife Evie, and we're from the western part of North Carolina, a little town called Horseshoe.
Good, thanks, Jim and Evie. And we've stayed overnight with them too. Okay.
I'm Steve Phillips, and this is my wife Emily, and we come from Etowah in western North Carolina, a few miles down the road.
Oh, you're the other western North Carolina group.
I'm a native Huntingtonian.
Okay, fine. North Carolina. Now do we go to Ohio? Now can we get to the Midwest Ohio state? Who's from Ohio? Oh, Nigel and Ian. And we visited them in Ohio as well. Good. Yes. Right. Any other Ohio? No. Okay. Oklahoma? No, I don't think Oklahoma. What other O's do we have? Any? Oregon. Yeah, we have Oregon here tonight. Who's Oregon? Oregon? Harriet Snyder, Portland. Okay. After Oregon? Are you ready for the P's? What are they? P's. Pennsylvania.
Yeah, they did.
Who's Pennsylvania? Here we are.
I'm Amy Bartleson from Scioto, Pennsylvania.
Scioto, Pennsylvania. Steve? Very good. Good. We're glad to have you here. Okay, Pennsylvania, the Q's, no, the R's, what's our? Rhode Island, yeah. We've been there for 6 years, 7 years. Who's Rhode Island? Oh, did Rhode Island come yet?
I think I stopped Brother down, and he's not here yet.
Rhode Island. After Rhode Island, we have South Carolina. No. Do we have South Carolina? Yeah, we do. All right. Pawleys Island, South Carolina. What's after South Carolina? South Dakota. Yes, we have South Dakota. Yes, we have South Dakota.
Stuart Brush from Rapid City, South Dakota, my wife Mildred.
Great. It's a long ways to come. Wow. What's after South Dakota? Tennessee? No. Tennessee, right? Don't have Tennessee? I think we have Tennessee. Utah? Texas. Oh, yeah, Texas. There's always Texas, right? There's always Texas. All right. Go ahead, Dottie. Tell us about Texas. No political advertisements, please. No political advertisements. Uncalled for. All right. Got enough butt for Bush. All right. Just don't forget that your brushes and not bushes. All right. After. What's next? Texas. More Texas.
I'm Shirley McBride, and I'm a granddaughter of a Brush. And when one of my daughters saw your wife's name, she said, "You mean Laura Bush is going to be there?" Laura makes a big difference.
We're getting in all of our plugs for the bushes. We got to take a straw vote tonight. Let's see. What's after Texas? Utah? Somebody is here from Utah or is coming tomorrow. Dot Huggins. Dot C. Huggins is coming tomorrow. And, or tonight, I guess. Okay, after Utah is Vermont. We have Vermonters here. Our second home. Danny, do you want to introduce the family? This is my son, Dan. Aurora is there, my granddaughter.
And this is my wife, Cassandra, my son, Emery. I'm Dan Brush from Woodbury, Vermont.
All right, more Woodbury, see? Yeah. Okay. There's my sister over there.
Well, I wanted to warn all of you that he has been to visit some of you, but I think Stuart's next project is to make a map and go and visit all of you.
Yeah, that's why we're here tonight. That's why we're here tonight. We're lining up bed and breakfast at your house.
My name's Pat. I live in Morgan, Vermont, up on the Canadian border.
We're going to tour the country and Canada and New Zealand and what was that other country I heard you? Korea, and visit your houses. Thanks, Pat, for that reason for our being here tonight. Yeah. Fletcher, where's Fletcher? Okay.
Fletcher Brush, my wife Jeanette from Salisbury, Vermont.
7th generation Vermonters. And the rest of you are Carol Brush Cummings and the rest of them. Right, good, fine. And you could you tell, could I ask you a question? What's your governor's middle name? Brush. Brush! Any other Vermonters here? Vermont's well represented. After Vermont we have Virginia. Okay. And where, Virginia?
I'm John Brush, better known as Jack. My wife Katie, and my daughter Sally Brush Tallhammer, her husband Billy Tallhammer, and their two daughters, Catherine and Christy, and we expect another daughter later on tonight, Elizabeth.
And
we're from Richmond.
You're from Richmond. Okay, from Richmond. Boy, we're glad you all came. That's great. Here.
Richard Lake, grandson of Brush, and I'm from the beautiful section of Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley.
Terrific. And?
I'm Edwin Brush, but call me Ted, and my wife Laura is with me. And we live in Whitestone, Virginia, which is on the Chesapeake, about 60 miles east of Richmond.
Okay. Oh, we're down to Virginia. Let's see now. What's next after Virginia? Washington State. West Virginia. No, that's a W. Washington State. Anybody from Washington? I don't think so. Maybe there's one, but not tomorrow. Okay, after Washington, West Virginia. And nobody's here from West Virginia. And after West Virginia is
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Oh, and I know who's here from Wisconsin. Right.
My name is Bill Brush. This is my wife Sue and my mother Marcy.
Right. And what about Bucky? Is Bucky here yet? Bucky Brush is Wisconsin, and he's the one that knows everything imaginable about the Brush Stadium in New York City. Definitely. Okay, we have, we're getting down toward the end, aren't we? Is there anybody beyond Wisconsin? Okay, we have some people here from Canada who are Wyoming. Oh my goodness gracious. Little Wyoming is not so little in comparison to our states here in Connecticut. Wyoming. Yeah. Riverton, Wyoming. I've done a lot of corresponding over the years to folks in Riverton, Wyoming. Good. So Wyoming was the last of the states in our listing, and moving on to Canada then. Will all the Canadians stand up? There we go. Will you introduce yourselves? Thank you. Who else? Back of the room?
Jean Williams, Robert Williams, and my daughter April Williams, and we're from Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
Windsor. And?
Elvira Brush Weigel
Elvira.
from Kingsville, Ontario.
And have we stayed overnight with you?
Yes, you did.
And we stayed overnight with Elvira, too. Were we good overnight company, Elvira?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I hope you're all listening. We're good overnight company, so remember that. Very good. Does that take care of everybody? Is anybody else here? I forgot New Zealand. How could I do that? You're going to win the trophy for coming to us. You're going to win the trophy. Halfway around the world. Right. That's really west of the Hudson River, isn't it? Okay. We're going to have the table blessing tonight by Bob Stanley.
That's right.
All right, there he is.
That's neat because it has here, blessed are the dead that die in the Lord.
Oh yeah, there's one over here.
This one doesn't show up real well.
This is.
Do you want this one? No. Wrong one. Wrong. Oh, here's some more. Oh my God. A bunch of them. It's like, I never see a name, the name in there. Do you want pictures of Henry S? It's fine. I have no problem. Oh, you just won. I'm too I about fell down the other time I took it. So.
Conklin.
Thomas?
Hello, Nicole.
Richard Brush.
How are you?
Is she in the way? Right there. Daughter of Richard Conklin and Elizabeth Elsie Brush.
Want to get a move? They're getting a picture of that. First time I've had a chance to talk to her. Yeah, you'll have to approach. I don't know which one.
Yeah, which one I
I guess I better take a picture.
Thank you.
But I got some that one that didn't want to see me yesterday. I picked that one up.
I need to go already.
Say that again?
This is George in the middle. Okay, and to the right is Annette. Okay, Brush. And this is the second wife, Margaret Brush, who was lost at sea.
Maybe I'm not so bad off.
Okay.
That's not the original John, no.
Samuel
Both
and
of their sons
Aeneas.
and their wives were there also.
We better go, we're going to miss the bus. Isn't that cool? And there's some other ones too. There's more brushes up here. Died 1901, died 1960.
Oh, there's Samuel, son of John and Elizabeth.
Here, this one died,
Died at 67. Anne Marie.
84.
Hannah Maria. Amy, wife of Abner.
Reverend Jesse Brush.
And Jeff Christ on there. Lord husband.
We better go, we're going to get left behind.
Oh, that's the son.
I'm not so sure. This looks like a deer. This looks like a deer. Here's Jesse back here. Someone was looking for Jesse.
Jeff husband. None of my business. It's mine and just in the morning. All right, women.
Oh, there's Jesse. I gotta get that.
You know that one? To get it back to where it was. But in the original house is the black door.
Major General Jesse Brush.
It's a good shot, huh? Hey, you don't want to get me in there, you'll break the camera. Guaranteed you'll break the camera.
Too late.
Hi, Pam from California.
All right.
Cousin Pam.
It's a great shot from him.
We're neighbors. Stay right there, Don. I live in Rochelle. I work at home, but that's what I'm home. You read probably recognize it. I thought I had some of my farm cards, but I don't. I also have a breed. No.
There will be considerable revenue. Jesse was amazing.
Oh, okay.
So it's,
wow.
Paul Brush.
Tom's River, New Jersey.
Okay.
but
What happened to the plan you
Yeah, that was I thought it was a good idea. Yeah. That would have been cool. Like, for this really.
No.
So that idea fell. But they're now creating.
This one's the son of the other one.
Huh?
This one's probably the son of the other one. The other one died in 1800.
Huh.
And that manager was responsible. Good job.
Wait a minute, 1815.
Situation that we have. Or even your Aunt Rosie could try. She complains about everything.
75? 1775? Couldn't have been in the Revolutionary War. Amanda Samus. I don't know who that is. Samus. My line. Or on my line.
And you are?
I'm Elaine Higby. Brush.
Okay.
Okay, 3 red arrows disappeared. It's still recording?
Okay, let's see.
Yeah, still recording. It says record.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Nick from Delaware.
And
Quite a picturesque place, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I fall asleep every time that bus moves. But we need schools.
Erica, where are you from?
From New Orleans. It's Texas.
Okay. Cool. Hey there. Who are you? What's your name?
Oh, I'm Stu Carpenter. I'm a brush on my mother's side. My grandmother was Louis Monet Brush. Her father, Charles Brush, was the last homeowner of the farm in West Neck Beach. It's always referred to in West Neck. That's always referred to in the book, the West Neck farm. And he went senile and got swindled by a nurse when he was in his 90s. and he lost like over $1.5 million in phony stocks, and he sold the farm and moved to the village.
Wow.
And then he was killed by a truck walking to the post office at 96. And run over by one of them newfangled automobiles.
Village meaning Huntington?
Right in Huntington, on Elm Street.
Hey, Nick.
I gotcha. Give me your proper names, please.
My name is Jean Marie Williams, and my mother was a Brush.
Okay.
And this is my husband.
Robert Arthur Williams, and I'm the chauffeur.
Okay, so you're the Brushes from?
I'm from New Jersey. He's from New Jersey.
New Jersey.
And I'm in New Zealand.
Okay.
And you're from Delaware. I used to take a moving picture.
Okay, it's the Worcester Brushes. The Worcester Brushes. Say hi.
My youngest daughter was a classmate to Alan
Size of this fireplace.
From the antique to the newfangled.
Last name was Laddie.
People live here now. I guess it's going
Chocolate.
Oh, that's been we're trying to get a little bit there. Yeah, little lines, everything lines.
There were beds in most of the downstairs rooms. And dining was done in the parlor as well. Formal guests were entertained in the parlor. General Delancey held his series of meetings to establish the tax rate for Suffolk County. All the tax assessors from the 5 towns in Suffolk County were forced to meet in that house. Joseph Lewis was he was the tax assessor for Huntington. So he hosted the meetings, and the general presided, and a couple of them were lax in attending the meetings. So the general issued something, and the order was given that they were to be written to, that they had best show up at the remaining meetings, or severe disciplinary action would be taken, which could mean death or being put in the prison ship or something, and that they'd better be at the remaining meetings. So everybody showed up for the remainder of the tax meetings to establish the tax rate that all of the landowners would have to pay to support the British garrison here during the war. And those meetings were held in that room across the street.
They were taxed by the British garrison.
Yeah, it was martial law, military government. So General Delancey, Delancey Street in New York City.
So the number of brushes in Huntington today is far, far, far less than it once was.
Surname Brush.
Surname.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. Well, it seemed like we were holding our own from what he was saying earlier. There are plenty of descendants that may not have the surname Brush. Scabs, but it's a common name in town. Wouldn't you say? You don't feel like the Lone Ranger, do you?
No, I'm not even a Brush.
Yeah, there's still one.
John Black's teacher at Huntington High is Brushes.
Yeah.
Kind of, well, this is the way my father did it, and maybe I'll try to change this a little bit or that a little bit, but they just learned by experiment what worked and what didn't work. They couldn't do anything
And the Janko family singers up there, the minister of the church up there in Morgan, Vermont, he got out to this song, and during the summer concert, he said, now I'm going to sing to you a song that's called The Brush. And I didn't know that we had a song. You know, I know we had a horse, we got a car, we got a ship, but I didn't know that we had a song called The Brush. So I perked up my ears and I paid attention, and I was really impressed because this song, in a gospel kind of a way, described my life. Life started out like a canvas, and God started painting on me. But I took the paintbrush from Jesus, and I painted what I wished to see. The colors I painted kept running, and the objects were all out of size. I had made a mess of my painting. My way now seemed so unwise. So I brought my painting to Jesus. All the colors, all the pieces so wrong. In the market of the earth it was worthless, but his blood made my painting belong. He worked with no condemnation, never mentioned the mess I had made. Then he dipped the brush in the rainbow, and he signed it, the price has been paid. When I gave the brush back to Jesus, when I gave the brush back to him, he started all over, life's canvas to fill. When I gave to Jesus the brush of my will. Laura?
Hope I can do this without accompaniment.
Will accompany without.
And the idea that he would think that I couldn't be understood while I'm singing.
Don't worry about that.
Okay. I hope I can do this justice. Life started out like a canvas, and God started painting on me. But I took the paintbrush from Jesus, and I painted what I wished to see. The colors I painted kept running, and the objects were all out of size. I had made a mess of my painting. My way now seemed so unwise. So I brought my painting to Jesus. All the colors, all the pieces so wrong. In the marketplace on earth it was worthless, but his blood made my painting belong. He worked with no condemnation, never mentioned the mess I had made. Then he dipped his brush in a rainbow, and he signed it, the price has been paid. I'm on key. When I gave the brush back to Jesus, when I gave the brush back to him, he started all over life's canvas to fill. When I gave to Jesus the brush of my will. Not my will.
Okay. The mottos. Boy, we got a lot of mottos. Oh my goodness gracious. We've got funny, we might not be able to take a vote tonight if we, oh, goodness gracious, I'm impressed. They really responded to this. I hope I've got them all here. Let me just check my pile and be sure that they're here. Okay. Oh, no, I've got more under here. I'm sure you must have come up with some good ones. Oh, I'm overwhelmed. Gracious. Here comes another one. All right. Here come our motto suggestions, and we'll see what we can do with them. First one is called Then, Now, and Forever. All right. Next one is Quiet Strength, but that should be rendered in Latin. Quiet Strength. Here's one called Keeping the Bristles Together. Oh, do you like that one? You like that one? Well, we'll set that one aside over here. I'll set that one aside over here. Maybe that one will qualify. Oh, here comes another one. All right, let's see what we've got. This is kind of nice. It's For Whom the Painting Never Ends. All right, that's kind of nice. Do you like that? Yeah. All right, well, we'll put that over here on the left. Motto contest, let's see. United through art, innovation, and competitive excellence. There it is, needed. Art being the paintbrushes, innovation being the automobile, and competitive excellence being the baseball and the thoroughbreds. All right, there's a possibility. No, okay. Pride in our heritage. Pride in our heritage. All right, I'll put it on the left. Deep roots, strong branches, and sound fruit. You like that? All right. All right, here we go. We tame life's snarls. Well, I guess we do. But we keep going on here. Now, that's not all. We got other suggestions on the same page. The bristles of life are brushed by our love. Brush, a useful tool. All right. Brushing worries away. A brush with fame. And we oh, Charlie, how did you do this? We prevent gingivitis. My God. We prevent gingivitis.
Don't forget to brush.
That would be. Where's Charlie been? I don't know. Charlie, what do you want these days anyway? That was great. Two mottos. The first one is Here We Come. H-A-I-R. No, Hair We Comb. That's it. That's what Hair We Comb. It's Hair We Comb. Oh, boy. That's like my ancestor, Edward Brush. He had a son, Edward Brush, Jr. They used to say that 2 Eds are better than 1. To pioneer and to persevere. That's a possibility. Do you like that? Yeah. We'll put that over there. Do you like? Okay. Okay. We shall endure by embracing and maintaining the integrity of our heritage. We shall, too long, okay. We shall endure by embracing, and we'd have trouble getting that bolded crest, I'm afraid. Okay. Mottos. Number 1, if anyone should succeed, let it be a brush. Number 2, we're not quitters. Well, I like that one because, boy, I've been tempted, I'll tell you. Number 3, if one succeed, it be a brush. Yeah, that's fun. The family endures. Okay, didn't see here too much on the applause meter, I think. The world gave us life, we give it variety. Where have you people been, anyway? They were on David's bus. That was the rowdy bus. I tried all the buses and I had to get out of David's bus. I just couldn't stand it. Okay, it is up to you. Now this, as you know, is, thank you, Karen. It is up to you. That's part of the 13 two-letter words that we use in our 12-step program. If it is to be, it is up to me to do it. Or as Laura often says to me very poetically, she says, do it, to it, do it. Okay. I don't know which way I'm supposed to read this thing. This one is, we tame life's snarl. What's a snarl? Do you know what a snarl is? Oh, they forgot the L. Well, it says, we tame life's snarl. I guess we have to have the L. And the other one is, brushing opponents aside. Ooh, that sounds like, it sounds like it must have come from a controller. Brushing opponents aside. I don't know. I gotta be careful about that one with all my problems. Okay, number 1. Here's one. Here we go. Service to country, faith in the Lord, and love for all. Like that? Very good. Little long. Okay. Yeah, number 2 suggestion from the same person. Coming out of Vermont, as a matter of fact. Brave, respectful, united, serving others, honorable. You know what those words start with? B-R-U-S-H. Brave, respectful, united, serving others, honorable. Well, you think that sounds pretty good? All right, here's another one with a B-R-U-S-H. Brushes really unite in service and honor. You like that second one, huh? Well, we'll put that one over here. Oh, golly, you people are full of ideas tonight. I thought you had your eyes half closed. Pioneering, perseverance, and pride.
What do you like?
That's good. All right. Here we go. Brush. Brush motto. Believe, rejoice. These are the B-R-U-S-H's again. Believe, rejoice, understand, sincerity, health. Here we go. Our brush with the past inspires us for the future.
Oh, I sort of like that. That has
Kinda
a little
nice.
folk feeling.
You know, I once got stopped for speeding, and the lady officer, she said, oh, when she looked at my license, she said, oh, you're Reverend Brush, aren't you? And I said, yes, I'm afraid that this is our afternoon to have a brush with the law. Here we go, sturdy roots. Is that good? You like that one? That was one of my better ones. You want to hear some of the others? I think I told all the others on David's bus. Deep roots, sturdy limbs, we are forest people.
Yeah, right.
You ever remember seeing the Gong Show? A brush with life. That's live? That's good? Okay. Good, Richard. You're still in the running. Make brush strokes on life's canvas. Paint life with your own brush. Those are two different ones. Make brush strokes on life's canvas is the first one, and the second one is paint life with your own brush. Yes? Okay. And the last one, okay, I gotta take out my glasses for this thing. Oh boy, this is tough. We must, quotation marks, we must brush the world with love, or we fail. Too long, you think? All right, well, all right, we're down to these here now. Let's see, those go there too. We're down to just a few here. Let's see. I'll read these through once, and then I think we'll have a stand up and count. The registrars to be our counters tonight? Okay, here we go. The ones we saved. Make brush strokes on life's canvas and paint life with your own brush. Okay, here's the next one. A brush with life. Our brush with the past inspires us for the future. Here's another one. Pioneering, perseverance, and pride. Here's one. Brush, respectful, united, no, brave, respectful, united, serving others, honorable. To pioneer and to persevere. Deep roots, strong branches, sound fruit. Pride in our heritage. For whom the painting never ends, and keeping the bristles together. Are you ready to vote? All right, we're going to read them one more time, and as we read them, please stand up if you are voting for whatever. I hope you know what you're voting for. You all know what you're voting for now? What would you like to say?
Can we reduce them to 3 and then go for the last?
We will take the best 3 and vote on them, all right? Good idea. If you would like to have it be keeping the bristles together, please stand up. Registrars, are you doing your thing? Are you counting? How many did you count? Okay, now you can't vote twice, you're just going to vote once. So we're going to take the biggest 3, and so are you counting, registrars? Read it again. Keeping the bristles together. How many did you have? $27. Wow. Okay, 27. Okay, sit down, please. The next one is for whom the painting never ends. Please stand up. Okay, we'll discard that one. I kind of like that one myself. Pride in our heritage. Pride in our heritage. Are you counting? How many did you count? 5. Thank you. The next is deep roots, strong branches, sound fruit. What have we got? Got quite a few. $20, $21. To pioneer and to persevere. Good way to have a stretch, isn't it? Huh? Okay. Keep standing up, please. Got a lot of people for this one. A lot of people for this one. How many? 27. Sounds like a familiar number. Okay, you may be seated, please. And the next one is Brave, respectful, united, serving others, honorable. Stand up here for that, please. Very few. Please keep standing. We're not through yet. Eight. Pioneering, perseverance, and pride. Our brush with the past inspires us for the future. How many? 18. All right. And a brush with life. That's the one. Okay. Thank you. And the last one is make brush strokes on life's canvas. Make brush strokes on life's canvas. All right, then I guess everybody's voted, right? Okay. We're down to the last three, and so we'll go for the, this one received 18, 10, 8, 27, 21, and 27. Okay, the three highest ones were 27, 27, and 21. So I'll read them and I'll read them all through first so you can think about them. That's a good idea. Thank you. So I would like to declare that the motto for the Brush family, you want to read that? And sorry about that, was given by Carl Brush of Oakland, California, and the motto will be to pioneer and to persevere. Carl, will you come up, please? We have some northern comfort for Carl. Okay, we really are running over. I didn't know that was going to take so long. Wow. But, okay, I'll put that in my pocket so we will remember that that is our motto, and we will use it on a regular basis. And we have to move along. We do have two presentations tonight from the Huntington Historical Society and from the Northport Historical Society. And so I'm glad to introduce you to these folks who have come to be our guests tonight to share with us for a few minutes about some of the things that they brought to these tables. And the reason why we had them tonight as our program, mini program as it is that these are two places that we wanted to get to this afternoon on the bus trip, but obviously we could not, to the historical societies that are very important to us and hold so many of our archives. So I would like to introduce to you first from the Northport Historical Society, George Wallace. Would you please help me welcome George Wallace?
Well, thank you very much, and congratulations on your new bottom, to pioneer, persevere, asterisk, and to keep the bristles together.
It must be a delightful experience to have a name that goes back as far as yours. My name goes back approximately 50 years to the time that my family came to Ellis Island, and they created the name Wallace. Before that, it was Wallace. For us in Huntington, we don't have a brush block. We don't have brush buildings. We don't have houses named for us. The family connection that we have is to the Hamburger Choo-Choo, which my father founded. Hamburger Choo-Choo being a diner which had a train that went around and would deliver people's hamburgers to them. So if we had a family motto like this, perhaps instead of a brush we would have cheeseburgers. Honestly, I'm very pleased to be able to speak to people whose ancestors came through Huntington, having been born and raised here, having gone to school with a brush. If Buzzy Brush is out there, I'd like to talk to you afterwards. Buzzy Brush, George Brush, 51 years old now. You are? Yeah. Heritage is an interesting phenomenon. We experience it in a lot of different ways. For me, and I was telling Alice from Detroit, that I measured my heritage in my chest. My grandmother died of influenza in 1919. My father coughed for most of his life, and I'm developing that same cough at this age. Also, my grandfather was a painter, painted in Connecticut, painted the ceilings of the Poli theaters. So that has passed down to me in my artistic activities as well. After the war, I'll tell you a story about it from the Northport perspective. Northport being the second purchase in Huntington, not the first purchase, so it's having important distinction. Northport is a place that Jesse went to do something that you don't hear too much about on Long Island. He was a guerrilla warrior. He had a guerrilla camp. He was part of a guerrilla group that fought against the British in a location right where the landfill is now, so you really can't see it. It's a lost piece of history, but in terms of location. But Town Line Road and Old Northport Road, there was a house there where a few guerrillas operated out of. Basically, once the British took over here, they owned Long Island. It's one of the regrets that I had as a small boy, to think that we didn't participate in the way that maybe they did in Lexington and Concord, and there weren't these battle sites on Long Island in the Revolutionary War. And that was something almost like the glacier, which is in a sense humiliating to me. You know, there's no continental shelf here. This was nothing until the glacier came and dropped a bunch of rocks and went away. That always embarrassed me as a boy. In the same way, the fact that the British occupied Long Island for almost the entire time of the Revolution was something that made me feel there was no battles here. In fact, there was quite a bit that happened here. The Brushes figured in this, as did many other families. The first Purple Heart that was awarded to a Revolutionary War soldier, the first Purple Heart in America, was awarded to a man who fought the Battle of Fort Sumter. And so I would point out to you that in a similar way, Jesse's activities up in the Fort Sumter area to interdict the British in their attempts to forage and to take what was available on Long Island from the people living here so that they could provision the troops was an important story to tell. And you probably heard this morning from Stanley Klein about how Jesse wrote a letter of defiance against the guy who occupied his house. But this is another aspect of the story. And what I've done is I've prepared, unfortunately Kinko's is open 24 hours, so I did this overnight. In the back, there's a picture here, Jesse's grave, which I think you saw today, and the story of Jesse Brush. I'll just read you one or two excerpts for you, and then I'll pass it on to the Huntington Historical Society. During the period when the British forces were headquartered in Huntington, various supply departments were set up during the occupation, including commissariats for cattle, forage, artillery, barracks, and quartermaster. Each of these departments relied upon expropriation and expeditions around Long Island to obtain their needed supplies. But to interdict the British supply lines, Jesse Brush joined up with several other local residents to form a guerrilla base. It was on Bread and Cheese Hollow Road. From this base, the guerrillas would attack British forces going to such locations as Smithtown or Kokomo and the Branch. Their aim was to reduce the enemy's ability to secure provisions and supplies with which to further their military objectives. He did this for about 2 years, and then one day got caught. So the story of his being caught is in here. The story of his being sent off to Provost Prison in New York City is in here, and ultimately his release and return to Huntington. It's a tremendous story, and I think that for those of you who trace your ancestry back to Jesse, it'll be a particularly valuable story. But to anybody who appreciates Revolutionary War history, I think you'll enjoy it. So please have a look at that, enjoy that. Come to the Northport Historical Society sometime so you can take a look at the Brush family Bible that we have there, and the carriage, which is in the basement, 1880s carriage, and we'd be glad to welcome you. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce somebody from the Huntington Historical Society, Robert Hughes.
Welcome back home to Huntington. I hope you all enjoyed your visit, those of you from out of state and off Long Island, which is off Main Street in Huntington Village. There's a house, number 31, which still stands. Was lived in by a man named Charles Street, who was a very prominent 19th century lawyer in Huntington. He wrote all the books on Huntington history and Huntington town government, and et cetera, et cetera. He lived on Prospect Street. His office was on the other side of town, in the Brush block, above the Bank of Huntington and the post office building. And the Brush block consisted of the Bank of Huntington, which was started by the Brushes, the Brush General Store on the corner, the post office, Grumman Stationery Store, blacksmith shop, and the Second Presbyterian Church. 12:30 a.m. on the night of September 12, 1888, someone coming home from a wedding noticed a fire in the back of the post office building. Alerted the residents. The Brush family got out unharmed, although Mrs. Brush, who was 76 at the time, left $100 of cash in her dresser drawer, which was not recovered. This fire became the worst fire in the history of Huntington Village. The entire block was destroyed. It was rebuilt even bigger and better a short time thereafter. But in the course of this fire, the New York City daily newspapers reported that all the town records were lost because Charles Street, the lawyer, was copying them over, and they were in his office. Turns out, fortunately, the papers were not in his office. They were at his house on Prospect Street. And that house that's now on Prospect Street is up for sale, and people want to demolish it because it will cost too much to fix. And it's so commercial, and I'd rather see an office building there. But now that we had the Brush family reunion.
When I was in my 20s, my father died at the age of 59, and my mother died a few years later. And so I was still a young person when my parents died. And going through the cellar and the attic, we found this and that of genealogical snips and notes about the family and where we came. It was never an important subject in our house. My father had mild interest in his background. Grandpa Brush did also. And Grandpa Camp had a little interest as well, but we never talked about it very much. We sometimes jokingly talked about my Grandpa Camp's trip to Quebec City. He rode his bicycle to Quebec City in 1897 from Meriden, Connecticut. They went 911 miles in 3.5 weeks, 45 miles a day. And miraculously, we found the photographs. You know, genealogy, you come up with so many surprises. When 1997 was coming along, I said, hey, Grandpa Camp always used to tell us about his bicycle trip to Quebec City in 1897. And now it's coming up on 1997. I wonder if it would be kind of fun to do something with that, just for the heck of it. So I wrote a letter to the Meriden Record newspaper, and I said, in 1897, Grandpa rode his bicycle to Quebec City with three other boys, and he was 16 at the time, and one of their teachers. So there were 5 of them on their bikes that went, and with these 5 who went, are there any other descendants of these boys who might be in Meriden today and who might like to meet together so we can go over this and find out what different families have said about this very unimportant event. And so one man called me up and he said that he was a nephew of one of the Wilcoxes, and he has a bicycle gas lamp, and maybe I'd like to see it. I said, yeah, that'd be nice. Another one called me up and she said, well, I'm a school teacher in Meriden, and I think possibly that this one boy was in my family, but I don't really know. I said, well, I'll study the genealogy of your family in Meriden and find out. Well, we found out that no, that wasn't so. Then another guy called me up from West Cheshire, and he said, I never read the Meriden record, but I read that issue. And I lighted upon your article, and I collect antique bicycles, and in an antique store about several years ago, I saw an old photo album of some old bicycle trip. What was the date of your grandfather's trip? I said July 6, 1897. July 6, 1897. He says, I've got all the photographs. And he never reads the Meriden newspaper. He wasn't from Meriden. Never reads the paper. He wasn't from there. Why would he read? And so we got together some folks who are interested in doing something for the 100th anniversary of this bicycle trip. I went to my grandfather's church in Meriden and told them about it. And I said, I'd be willing to preach for you on July 6, 1997. And then we're going to have a photo opportunity, the place where they stepped off. And I had my grandfather's logbook from 1897 from that bicycle trip. It covered day by day for about half of the trip. And in 1997, Laura and I, and my sister, Pat, and Danny to some degree too, we reenacted the bicycle trip from Connecticut all the way to Quebec City, and then they took the overnight steamship to Montreal, and then they came down the Richelieu Canal into U.S. and in New York State, and they crossed over Lake Champlain at Chimney Point into Middlebury, and then down through Massachusetts, and eventually they got back home. And so we just had such I looked up all the newspaper accounts of that bicycle trip in the Meriden newspapers from 1897, and put together some marvelous scrapbooks for the family. With those old photographs that we copied out for everybody, Laura and I reenacted the photographs. We stood exactly in the flume in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, took the same picture that was in the photograph, the same picture of the old man in the mountains, the same picture of a house where they stayed in Quebec province. They went through Quebec province and went through towns where they had never seen bicycles before, and on roads that weren't roads because there were no roads between one town and another. There were just horse paths. Really made history come alive. Well, when the folks died and I dug out those materials from the cellar and from the attic, there was a great big ancestral portrait. And on the back of it was the name William Meade. Well, we didn't know if it was William Meade, but my father said the one thing that he did know about that ancestral portrait is that it was a direct ancestor. So then I said, oh, well, then it's not William Meade, because he's not a direct ancestor. And I came to find out because somebody left us, an aunt from several generations back, left us an account of belongings. And that ancestral portrait was listed as a belonging and was identified as Benjamin Brush. Our great-great-great-grandfather, who was in the Revolutionary War, went in as a young man, only about 16 or 17 years old, into the Revolution, and was soon captured and put into the Sugar House prison in New York City, one of the most infamous and notorious prisons of that war. And so then we knew that this was Benjamin Brush. And I found Benjamin Brush's gravestone in the Greenwich Cemetery. And you could hardly read it anymore, so I had it recut. And his wife Samantha, it was time to recut her gravestone too. And so we did that as well. And every Memorial Day I take Benjamin a flag. And then I come back home and I look up at his portrait in our living room and I say, Benjamin, I did something nice for you today. Took you a flag. I could do every year because we appreciate the military service that you gave to make our country free. And he looks down at me and he smiles a little bit and he says thank you. And we love Benjamin. He makes history come alive. And wherever you stand in the living room, our daughter Amy, when she was a little girl, this was almost scary for her because all the kids know that no matter where you stand in the living room, Benjamin's eyes are on you. Well, I got all of these things out of the attic and out of the cellar, and so many of them were just simply not identifiable. We had a lot of samplers from the 1700s and early 1800s with no way to identify them. We had to figure that all out. One of the samplers was in code. It had an A, and then it had 3 letters. Then it had a C, and it had three blanks, 3 dashes. W, dash, dash. B, dash, dash, dash. I, dash. J, dash, 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 dash. We had to figure all that out. It was never not written down. We didn't know who it was. So we finally figured it out. Every letter was followed by the dashes, and it meant Anna Camp was born January the 27th in the year of our Lord. So then we knew that it was Anna Camp, born in the year of our Lord, 1785. It makes history come alive. So I took a lot of these, I found all the old photographs, but the photographs, so many of them didn't have any names on the back. Oh, my people, if you have photographs in your house, would you please put names on the back? Oh, it would help us out so much. It's so wasteful to have these marvelous old daguerreotypes and old tin types and old photographs with no names on them. You might just as well throw them away. But if you just take a moment, get them out and take a moment, put the names on the backs, it's going to help your descendants immensely. So it was difficult getting them identified at all because, you know, my parents were both only children. So there were no aunts and no uncles and no cousins. Fortunately, or unfortunately, as the case may be, the folks died early enough so that I still had some great aunts and great uncles. And so I'd hike around and visit one after another, and not only get the photographs identified, but also ask for oral histories, because those great aunts and those great uncles could tell me about their parents and their grandparents, and sometimes their great-grandparents. Aunt Pearl told me that my great-great-grandfather, Gottfried Scheibel of Heidelberg, Germany, was buried somewhere near the Brooklyn Bridge. That wasn't too helpful, but yeah, it was kind of helpful. Well, it wasn't too bad. I could do something with that. And so I went to Brooklyn and I said to them on both sides of the river, you know, it wasn't Brush who laid the foundations for the Brooklyn Bridge. I don't remember, I think it was George Brush. But anyway, I went to Brooklyn and said, you know, could you give me maps of the land maps for the, you know, about 1880, 1890. I got to find cemeteries. And I found the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, and You see, with Gottfried, I didn't know when he was born, I didn't know when he died. I was told that the family tradition was that he was a Catholic priest. Okay, in Heidelberg. Okay, then he was buried somewhere near the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, I found the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn and discovered that he was buried in an unmarked grave. I knew that he was buried in that unmarked grave because of the cemetery records. And I went into the cemetery office and I asked about Gottfried Scheibel. I have his beer mug from Heidelberg University, well, from Heidelberg anyway, 1843, and I also have a very nice pen drawing likeness of him, which I love. And so, they said, yes, he's buried here in an unmarked grave with his wife, and this is his date of death, and this is how many years he lived, and how many months he lived, and how many days he lived, and you can do the subtractions in order to find his birth date. And so Laura and I, Laura majored in German in college, and so we went to the German-speaking newspaper. What is it, Harry, the Staatsmanager or something like that? Okay, well, we looked for his obituary. There it was. Yeah, we got his obituary and information about him from the obituary. And then Laura and I, on sabbatical, we went to Heidelberg and went into the Catholic archives and discovered his birth certificate, his baptismal certificate in 1823. And that gave us the names of his parents and the vocation of his father and the circumstances of his birth. And that was really neat. And now since that I've found out a lot of more exciting biographical information about Gottfried Scheibel and originally, and I can now trace him back to the late 1600s in Heidelberg. All because my great aunt told me he was buried somewhere near the Brooklyn Bridge. And that helps history to come alive. And it's a mystery if you like solving mysteries. So, there you go, Lee, wherever you are. There's a mystery for you. Okay, well, I was traipsing around Boston. We loved Boston. I went to seminary outside of Boston. Laura went to Boston University. But some years ago, shortly after my parents died, I was going to the denominational office up at 14 Beacon Street on Beacon Hill, and I saw a bookstore. And in the window of the bookstore were 3 volumes that I recognized as being old books, old family books on the Kellogg family, the Kellogg's of the Old World and the New. And I said, hey, that's in Grandpa's collection. How come they're in this window? And so I went inside Goodspeed's bookstore and said, I see in your window some books that are identical to the ones that I inherited from my grandfather. I said, is there any place where you can go and see books like this, and not to buy them, because they're priceless, but just to study them? Oh yes, you go up there to Newberry Street to the New England Historic Genealogical Society, and they have 6 floors up there. You can spend a lot of time there. And so that's what I did. I went up there, and every Monday, I was minister in Rhode Island at this time, so I could just take the train to Boston every Monday on my day off and put myself in the library and do the entire fan chart of the Brush family and some of our lines going back even to the year 1100 and finding some real interesting stuff. I mean, I found that William Shakespeare's great-grandfather is a direct ancestor, and James Chilton of the Mayflower, he died on the journey over. He didn't quite make it, but that's all right. We call him our Mayflower ancestor anyway. I guess he did. Does that qualify, Harry? Does that qualify? I guess so. You almost made it, you know. Almost made it. Died 3 days before the ship landed, and so James Chilton of the Mayflower is there, and John Milton's sister, you know, the blind poet, his sister is there. And you find so many interesting people when you do your fan chart and find all the different people who came together to make up you. And that reminds me of something that Bob Steele said. You know, Bob Steele, he's been on the radio since 1936 in Hartford. He was born in 1911 in Kansas, and he came to Hartford when he was a boy, and he started radio broadcasting, and Pat and I and my brother Don, we all listened to Bob Steele when we were growing up. And Bob Steele said two things that are very important. The first thing he said was, he's in his middle 80s now, he's still broadcasting, you know, he hasn't quit. No, we're not quitters. And he said, as long as you're going to get old, you might as well get as old as you possibly can. The other thing that he said was very important for genealogists. He said that at the age of 82, he discovered something very important for genealogists. He discovered that sex is inherited. That if your parents didn't have it, you probably won't have it either. So anyway, what happened was when you go upstairs and see the exhibits, you'll see the big fan chart. And then what I did from that point was to take all of the direct ancestors and write out their biographies and put them into these scrapbooks with all the family pictures that go back many, many generations, and some of the other memorabilia that have come down the family. So I have two big scrapbooks on my father's side of the family that go back to the year 1100, and then on my mother's side of the family, two other scrapbooks that go back to the 1300s. And I studied Laura's genealogy and did a smaller job on it, and so it became a lifelong hobby. And then what happened was that in 1970, I said, you know, this, I'm running out of ideas. I've kind of exhausted this kind of work that I want to do. I've got to do something else. And so I said, I think that I'll write a letter to every brush in the United States and tell them that I would like to write the brush genealogy, and would you please send me back all of your family trees, and would you please become a researcher in your own geographical area, because I couldn't possibly go and visit every place in the United States to study the church records, the cemetery records, all the different records that there are. And so that letter went out to 1,150 brush families in the United States and Canada in 1970. And then the correspondence started. I'll tell you, the correspondence started. Oh, we didn't have computers. We had shoe boxes and card files. And all of these letters are coming in. One of the letters came in from Huntington, Long Island, actually Green Lawn, from a man named Russell Brush. And Russell was an early retiree, and he said that I need a hobby. Some of his children were still quite young, even though he was retired early, and so he was a kind of a stay-at-home father. And he said, I would like to help you. So he became eventually my collaborator, and we met together many times. And sometime during the course of this weekend, we're going to have a tribute to Russell, who died a few years back, and Laura and I were at his funeral service, and I spoke at his funeral service. But Russell was a great help to me. The book would not have been the book that it is if it had not been for Russell Brush. And then Russell, I think it was Russell who got in touch with Harry in New York at the New York Genealogical Biographical Society. And Harry did so much of the work for us on the brushes in New York City, and in their migrations, and so that went through. And eventually, I discovered the companion volume. I didn't discover the companion volume until I'd gotten into this project for a while, and I discovered that, gee, there was a guy by the name of Conklin Mann in 1935. He wrote all of these articles about the first 5 generations of the Brushes. And, okay, well, that became my number one source. And so I looked up to try to find out, well, when did Conklin Mann die, and what happened to all of his unpublished papers? So I mysteriously worked on this mystery, asking the New York folks, when did he die? You got a date of death? Yeah, we got a date of death. Okay, where did he die? Oh, well, he died up here. Okay, well, I've got to get the newspaper obituary and find out who are the next of kin. And so I did that and found out that he had a daughter in Milford, Connecticut. I called the daughter and said, you know, do you have any of your father's unpublished papers? Well, no, they're down with my brother in North Carolina. I said, oh, where in North Carolina? Well, right near Greensboro. I said, oh, that's wonderful, because Laura's parents live in Greensboro. We go down there once or twice a year. Yeah, so we got down there, and I made friends with Conklin Mann's son, Hudson, and visited him several times and got to know him. And he had no interest in genealogy himself, but he wasn't quite ready to give up his father's files yet. And so I kept visiting him. Eventually, he became sick, and he called me and he said, I really have no use for Dad's files. Why don't you come and pick them up, and you can have them. And boxes and boxes of files about all the families of Huntington, Long Island, in this area. That helped. That helped. Well, anyhow, eventually, it took 12 years, 12 to 13 years, but the book was finally finished in November of 1982. I was spending every free moment from my ministry working on the book for those 12 to 13 years. And it was such a relief when the book was finally published. One of the difficult parts about it was that when the book was published, there was no celebration. Except, yeah, well, Laura and I did come down and we took Russell and Jane out for dinner one day, but there was no real celebration because in December that year, 1982, I went into alcoholism rehabilitation and stayed in therapy for 3 months, taking care of my addictions. So I've been sober now for 18 years. Thanks be to God. I don't know why they call it hard liquor. It was never very hard for me. But anyhow, yeah, it's hard on everybody else, I know, because I was a really a very sarcastic and even more egotistical person than I am now. So anyhow, but it happened. The book got published, and eventually it won an award with the Genealogical Society in Connecticut, and so it sold out. We had 650 copies of it, and it sold out when the award was won. And Russell was the reason, really, for the award, because not that, you know, the alcoholic does very accurate work in order to prove to everybody that he's not an alcoholic. And so it was very accurate work, but Russell went over all of my work very carefully. And so the book won an award for excellence, and I give Russell the credit for that. So we had the book republished, and the book is for sale, 2 for 1. I always tell people when they inquire about the book, oh yeah, I got a few copies left. You better get here. Well, we got quite a few, and a 2 for 1 book sale. You take some home on your way back to where we live. So anyway, that's how the book got published. I did during the course of I took a course in New York at Perry's institution there. given by the esteemed genealogist Ken Stryker-Rhoda. And when I was in that course, I said to Ken Stryker-Rhoda, we were having a little conversation, and I said to him, well, you know, I've been doing my genealogical studies now for 11 years. And he looked over at me and he said, well, Mr. Brush, I'd like to offer you my congratulations at having reached the introduction. Right, Harry? You can imagine him saying that to me. And so that's kind of how it goes. But making history come alive. We have a wonderful heritage. We have a wonderful heritage in our family. And I'm going to lift up some of their names Sunday during the morning worship service, and we're going to have a time of remembrance, because there are so many people in that book who are the just common, ordinary, everyday people who lived lives of heroism as they faced the opportunities and the challenges of their own lives. And so we are the current edition of our heritage. As we look back at them and appreciate the values that they held dear, so we need to remember that we are between the past and the future, and our testimonies and the ways in which we live and the contributions that we make in our generation are very, very important, which maybe is one of the reasons why we are here. We look to the history and the history of our past, and we look to the horizons of our future, and we know that we are right in the middle as people of opportunity. Okay, that's what I wanted to say to you tonight. Is there anything you'd like to... Is there anything you'd like to ask me or Laura and me about the things that we tackle as far as our genealogical pursuits are concerned, or anything about the ways in which we handle things? Anything you want to share about your own genealogies? Or yeah?
I have one question.
What's that?
Back before computers were in everyone's home, how did you get a hold of all the brushes in the United States and Canada?
You know what I did? You won't believe this because it's so incredibly unmodern. For 6 Mondays, I was living in Niantic at this time, Niantic, Connecticut, near to London. For 6 Mondays, I went to the Hartford Public Library and I hand-copied out of every telephone directory in the United States and any of the directories that they had in Canada. And I copied, for 6 Mondays, I spent all day long copying every name and every address in order to send out 1,150. I don't know if it was 1,150 or 1,350, it doesn't matter. But anyhow, that's how I did it. I sent out, after copying all those names in a big notebook. It was tedious, but somebody had to do it.
But the people that he had, that you asked to do research, those people were truly wonderful and were very thorough. I remember reading a lot of their letters as they were coming in, and that was early in our marriage when all of that was happening. And it was really wonderful to see how they
One of them is here tonight. I don't know, maybe more of them. Frederica, where are you? Frederica Stanulovich. We had lots and lots of correspondence together because she did research. What's that?
Written by hand.
Written by hand, of course. How else? And did research in her geographical area. Is there anybody else who did that for me? Yes.
My mother, Dorothy Brush.
Your mother did, and she was?
Dorothy Brush.
Oh, Dorothy Pratt, of course. Yeah. Stone Ridge, New York, right? Was that it?
Yorktown, Virginia.
Oh, Yorktown, Virginia.
Oh, Bernard Brush was her brother.
Oh, yes, sure. Okay, there's another example. Maybe some others of your parents or your mother did some. Yeah. Joyce.
I
Got
found
a
your
lot of
letter.
stuff from Joyce. Oh, incredible. She was a great researcher for us. So the book came as a result of the efforts of many. It wasn't just me. I just kind of started it and collated all the material and studied the census reels and did the writing. It took an awful long time to write it because, you know, you had to write it all first by hand. And then I had to type it all. I would get up at 6:30 in the morning and type with 2 fingers. And those 903 pages. Yeah. Okay, yeah, question?
No, I don't have that. I would just like to suggest to everybody here that we give Stu and Laura a hand. I think they've done a tremendous job in bringing this reunion together, and the research and the lifelong project he has made this for all of us to share. Bravo. So I think that we should, the accolades should go to
Don't puff us up too much because humility is not my long suit. In fact, my tennis partner told me that I should work on my humility, but I told him, I said, well, Father Jacques, if there's something that I don't have any of, how can it be a problem? So anyhow, do you have any questions about the schedule? You have the schedule in hand in your green booklets, and if you have any questions about the schedule.
I think that's the beginning of it.
Oh, yeah.
Brother's hobby is collecting all this stuff. Well, it's got the same name, so I guess it's natural. Oh, yeah, right. Yes, my brother dreams of finding a brush arclight. He's got other arclights, but he hasn't been able to get his paws on the brush one yet. Now, this is the other thing. My great-grandmother, he was one of the first people to really use, to build a windmill for electrical purposes, to run a dynamo. And he's like written up in all sorts of books on, now that everybody's interested in wind as a form of electricity. And he built this gigantic windmill and became, you know, probably one of the very first people. He powered his whole house with this gigantic windmill.
This was your
my great-grandfather.
Is that original?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the windmill is actually almost, I have a feeling that something maybe even as important as the arc light because of the way everybody's now all the energy sources. Huh.
And label the other pictures so you have one you can look at and label and everything.
That's Stuart Brush.
Yeah. No, because she wants to bypass.
I'm just so excited. I just found that Mel, whoever he is, from California.
We met him for the first time in Philadelphia, California. Yeah, and he is also my wife.
Now it's
Oh, yes. Probably, yes. Because her family. No, I'm
I mean, I think they would be interested, but I wouldn't bring over
Oh, no, not fishing.
I'm 60 years old and I only just got the pictures.
Yes. Yeah. See, that's what I mean. You would not want to.
When my mother gave up her house this past year, it's when I
finally relinquished these things.
She didn't have a choice. No, actually she did. She took them with her and I crawled under the bed. I said, Mother, I have good care of them.
Yeah, they don't want to give them up.
She gave up everything. She gave up everything.
My father thought it's great. Let's go. This is a good thing to do.
My kid doesn't want it. Then I have to go back to. And we haven't had
I haven't.
It was all in the other antiques. My daughter's got a big house now. The only stuff I was.
Yeah. See you in the morning. Nice to meet you.
Pictures in the bed, How do you know?
One son. So when I found out we started from John, I go, okay. So none of these are, I'm looking for my but then I go to
all this disconnection was, in many cases, migration. Now, this was back in the 1970s, and we were fortunate that we started then, and not earlier, for two reasons. The first was that in the 1970s, there started to be a great deal more interest in genealogy, so you were more apt to find people who were willing to help you with the project. But the other thing was that computers were beginning to be used then to index the federal censuses of the United States. And they started with 1800, 1790 had already been done, 1800, 1810, 1820, and so forth. This is still going on today. They're still finishing up the indexes to the 1870 census. But most of these early census indexes came out while we were working on the book, and they helped us to find a lot of the missing brushes and make a lot of the connections. The 1900 census was also released while we were working on the book, and that had already been indexed by the government, so that was also a great help. Now, one thing we learned as we went along, that the family was much larger and more complex than we had thought. Well, how did it get this way? Let's go back to the beginning. When Thomas and Richard Brush arrived here in the middle of the 17th century, they had taken the very daring step of crossing the Atlantic Ocean, knowing that they'd probably never be able to go back to England. They were fortunate in selecting Huntington as their home because this really was prime agricultural land. The fact that it has been pretty much covered up today by housing and commercial development. But for generations, it was a wonderful place to make your living by farming. And that's, of course, what most of the early Brushes did. And at first, they may have thought that they had found a permanent home for the entire family. Now, between them, Thomas and Richard had 8 sons. They married and set up their own households, and there was plenty of land in Huntington for all of them. When the next generation came along, however, Thomas and Richard's 21 grandsons, who each wanted to set up a farm of his own, a problem developed, and a problem was beginning to develop for every family in Huntington. Each married son wanted his own farm, and not a particularly large farm. Farms in Huntington were of moderate size, but with the Huntington families producing so many sons, it was impossible to provide a farm for everyone. And of course, as land became scarce, it also became more expensive. So in this generation, only 10 of the 21 Brush sons remain in Huntington. about half of the family. And the rest had to go off and find homes elsewhere. This was the beginning of the brush migration. Now, you might think that they would first look on Long Island, and they probably did, but there wasn't much here as an alternative to Huntington. One brush did go to Hempstead in the county to the west of us. But the situation there wasn't very different from that here. And to the east, there was a lot of unused land, but it was all in large tracts owned by individuals or families, and they were not yet ready to sell to outsiders. So the rest of Long Island was not really an option. But you could get on a boat and cross the Sound. And of course, that was the easiest way to travel in those days. And directly on the other side of the Sound was Fairfield County, Connecticut. There were a lot of settlements there already, but land was still available. And so 4 brushes went over there. And you know, the people in Fairfield County were very much like the people here in Huntington. They were English Puritans. In Connecticut, they had become Congregationalists. Here in Huntington, they became Presbyterians, but they were cut at the same cloth. And so the Huntington people who went over there felt quite at home. We find Benjamin and Richard settling in Greenwich, Thomas and Zacchaeus settling in New Fairfield. And they established a brush presence in Fairfield County, which is still there today. Another place that the brushes went to was New York's Hudson Valley. That became the destination of 4 other brushes of this generation. They went to Westchester County, Dutchess County, and Orange County, and brushes continued to live in all of those counties for many generations. Now, the Hudson Valley, unlike Fairfield County, was quite different from Huntington. There were some English there, but they weren't necessarily all Presbyterian or Congregationalists. A lot of them were Quakers or Anglicans. And then there were also Dutch and French and Germans. It was a much more polyglot area. And future generations of brushes that lived in this area would intermarry with these other groups. There were 2 other brushes in this generation, and they went to New Jersey, to Huntington County on the Delaware River. So in this generation of the family, we have spread out to what we now call the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut.
Yes, I thought about that.
Now we come to the next generation. And these are the great-grandsons of Thomas and Richard. That's better. Now we come to the great-grandsons of Thomas and Richard. We're in the second half of the 18th century. And some of these men were old enough to serve in the American Revolution. Others came of age after that conflict. The genealogy now shows 52 of them marrying and setting up their own households. And a little under 1/3 of these were still living in Huntington, 16. You can see the numbers beginning to shrink further. The majority are still in New York, which was a colony and then a state during this period. 3 of them had actually moved east on Long Island into Smithtown, the next town to the east of Huntington, which was originally inhabited only by Smiths. But they gradually began to sell land off to other families, and a lot of brushes have lived in Smithtown since that time. 4 brushes also found their way into New York City, and that's something I'm going to say something about a little bit later. 8 brushes of this generation were living in the Hudson Valley, and after the Revolution, 3 more began to move into upstate New York, which would become the home of many brushes in the future. We find one Alexander Brush going into Delaware County, another Alexander Brush going to St. Lawrence County in the far north of New York, and William Brush to Chenango County in central New York. There were also more brushes in New England in this period. 7 families in Connecticut, and now several families move up into Vermont. Only 2 stayed there. The rest just sort of passed through Vermont on their way into upstate New York. There were also a few in this generation living in New Jersey, and the first Brush settles in Pennsylvania. That was Jonas Brush from Connecticut, who went to Susquehanna County on the northern border of Pennsylvania, and Brushes would live there for many generations afterwards. Maybe there are still some there today. Some of the younger members of this generation were even more adventurous. There was a Thomas Brush from Huntington who went to St. Augustine, Florida. This was in 1823, which was only 4 years after the United States had acquired Florida. And there were very few white people living down there. And you can rather imagine what conditions must have been like in that tropical climate. They not only didn't have air conditioning, they didn't have any of the modern conveniences that we're used to. And so Thomas did not stay in St. Augustine very long. He came back to New York. But he was our pioneer Floridian. And finally, in this generation, you see the first foray of brushes into the Middle West. There was an Eli Brush who went from Connecticut to Ohio, and an Elkanah Brush who went from New York to Illinois. And this was the beginning of a very important movement, as you'll see in a minute. Now, one reason the Brushes were continuing to move was not only that they needed more land, but very often the land they found after their first migration turned out to be not so hot. Very often the soil was thin and rocky, and it was quickly worn out by the farming methods that they were using. Also, the climate generally turned out to be much harsher than what they had been accustomed to. And in addition to that, they may have arrived in an area that was fairly unpopulated, but it very quickly became crowded with other New Yorkers and New Englanders and European immigrants. But this often would drive up the value of the land, and they were able to sell their farms at a decent price and move on to some newly opened territory where they had heard that there was good land that could be gotten more cheaply. And this scenario just kept getting repeated. And so the migration of farmers would never stop until they had reached the Pacific coast. Now, I have to say at this point that the personal examples I'm giving in this talk are, they lean very heavily on the male side of the family because, unfortunately, most of the historical record that has come down to us is primarily about the men of the family. And here and there are little snippets that tell us what the lives of the women must have been like. And in a few cases, there are even some women who had accomplishments which made them historical figures in their own right. But to a large extent, we have to try to recreate what the history of the Brush women must have been like. And this is a topic which is very popular in genealogy today. There have been several books written on the subject about how to recreate the lives of your female ancestors. And we, of course, must always keep in mind that the Brush women were half of the Brush family, and without them, there would be no Brush family. This generation that I've just been talking about was the primary generation of the period of the American Revolution. And so often when you study an American family, that is a United States family, you find that they were divided when it came to the Revolution. Some of them avidly supported independence. Some of them just as avidly remained loyal to the crown, and some of them didn't seem to take any position whatsoever. This is a very common situation, and it's particularly true of New York families. But in the case of Brushes, I will say that the majority of them do seem to have actively supported the cause of independence, but not all of them. You'll see that in the next generation of the family, there were two Brushes from Connecticut, John and Stephen, who went to Upper Canada, now known as Ontario, and of course that was a prime area of settlement by Loyalists. When they went there, it's rather interesting. This was before central and western New York State had been much developed, and they were going beyond that area. And we have to wonder about how they might have gotten there. And I was telling somebody yesterday that there's a diary that was left by a member of another New York family who followed the same route at the same time. They sailed up the Hudson River and then up the Mohawk as far as they could go. Then they went overland until they reached a stream that would take them to Lake Ontario. In other words, they tried to travel by water as much as possible because, for all intents and purposes, there were no roads. And this is also before the Erie Canal was built. So these, the two Brushes who went out there to Ontario just after 1800, they were really pioneers. And they were living in a very isolated area when they first got there. Now let's go on to the next generation. This is the generation that is called the sixth generation in the genealogy. They lived mostly in the early 19th century, although many of them were born in the previous century. In fact, a great many of them were old enough to serve in the War of 1812. And indeed, some of them served in the War of 1812 on both sides. Our Canadian cousins served in the British forces. And of course, many Brushes served in the American forces in the same conflict. Now, in the previous generation, there were 52 families. Now they've grown to 134. They had lots of children in those days, and despite all of the difficulties of life 200 years ago, a remarkable number of children lived to marry and to have children of their own, and so the family is growing. Now, out of these 134 families, only 19 are left in Huntington. It's just 15% of the total. It keeps shrinking. There are 9 living elsewhere in Long Island, including an Ebenezer, who was the first Brush to live in Brooklyn. And that's very important, as you'll hear. 16 are living in New York City. And 30 others are scattered all over New York State. They moved into a long list of counties. We don't have time to name them all. And a major factor in helping the settlement of upstate New York was the building of the Erie Canal. This changed everything as far as transportation was concerned. The Brushes of New England were also growing. The Connecticut contingent in this generation has grown to 17 families, still all living in Fairfield County. And there are 7 in Vermont and 2 in Massachusetts. All in all, the New England Brushes account for about 1/5 of the family at this time. There are a few Brushes in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. 2 have made their way to Washington, D.C., which had just become the nation's capital. But now, look, there are 19 Brush families living in the Middle West. They're beginning to grow. 10 are in Ohio, 6 in Illinois, and 1 each in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Missouri. And we have 4 Brush families in Canada, 3 in Ontario, 1 in Quebec. You can see it's the same pattern as in the previous generation, but they're spreading out further and further. And they're changing in other ways too. They're no longer all just Presbyterians or Congregationalists. You begin to see some who are Methodists. And even Episcopalians. And some become Dutch Reformed, which is very interesting. Some of the Brush men had taken Dutch wives, and the children were brought up in the Dutch Reformed Church, and later on we even have some Dutch Reformed ministers who are Brushes. One of them even became the president of the Reformed Church in America for a while. But not all the Brushes went west. There are some interesting exceptions. One was Ebenezer Bradford Brush from Huntington. I think when we started out, we didn't even know he existed, but at some point, either Stuart or Russell heard from a descendant of this branch of the family. Ebenezer was sort of a wrong-way Corrigan. Instead of going west, he went east to Martha's Vineyard, of all places. And his descendants continued to live there for many generations, but Ebenezer, like so many vineyard men, took to the sea, and on a voyage to Cuba, he caught some tropical fever and died down there. And that brings up another Brush who went to the sea at about the same time. That was Jesse from Huntington. He joined the Navy at the time of the War of 1812, and in 1815 he died on board the famous USS Constitution. Another Brush who joined the Navy was Nehemiah from New Jersey. And he migrated all over the map. First, he served with General Anthony Wayne fighting Indians in the Midwest. And then he joined the Marines and ended up in the Mediterranean, where he was taken captive by the Turks. And he spent 3 years in a Turkish prison in Tripoli, Libya. And what stories he could tell us. Huh? But he was finally freed, and he came back to this country, and he migrated out to Fulton County, Illinois. And there his sons were early converts to the Mormon faith. And now they didn't join the main Mormon church, which went on to Utah. They joined the group known as the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which made its headquarters in Missouri. And in the next generation, Nehemiah's descendants migrated to California. So you have these unusual migrations. They didn't all just go west. You also see in this period many Brushes who were becoming better educated and were going into professions like the ministry, law, medicine. You also find those who were getting involved in politics, and if you read through the genealogy, you'll find many of them. Henry Brush, who was a pioneer settler in Ohio, was the only Brush who was has been elected to the U.S. Congress. There were many others who were elected to state legislatures, and quite a few who became mayors of major U.S. cities. There was an Elijah Brush who became Attorney General of the state of Michigan in this generation. But let's go on to the next generation, the seventh. Now we have 248 Brush families, getting very big. It's almost double the number in the previous generation. Now these generations begin to be spread out over much longer periods of time. So you have men in this generation who are old enough to be in the War of 1812, others who are young enough to be in the Civil War. New York State is still the home to over half the Brushes at this time. And 31 of them are in Huntington, some 200 years after Thomas and Richard's arrival. A little over 10% of their descendants are still living in this town. A larger group than in Huntington are the number that are in New York City and Brooklyn. There are 40 Brush families of this generation living in either New York City or Brooklyn. And others are scattered across New York State. I think in the end, you'll find that Brushes have lived in every single one of New York State's 62 counties. Now, interestingly enough, the New England contingent has now shrunk a bit. There are just slightly fewer Brush families in New England at this point in the family history. And there aren't very many in the Middle Atlantic states, New York, and, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. There are a handful just showing up in the South, 1 in Florida, 2 in Louisiana, and 3 in Texas. And north of the border, we have now 8 families in Ontario and 1 in Quebec. But the big change that has taken place, and it's evident in this generation, is the growth of the Midwestern Brushes. The Midwest has now become the home to about 1/4 of the entire family. Ohio alone has 27 Brush families, as many as all of New England. There are 14 in Illinois, and a few each in Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. A total in all of 59 Brush families throughout the Midwest. And for the first time, we begin to see some further west, 4 in California, 1 in Idaho, 1 in Oregon. Now from these statistics, you might gather that this generation produced a lot of real pioneers, that is, Western pioneers. We have Elkanah Brush, who left New York for Texas when it was first opening up to Anglo settlement. He was there as early as 1834, when it was still under Mexican rule, and when the Republic of Texas was declared in 1836, he was elected to its first House of Representatives. There was a Seaver Brush who also went to Texas, but for some reason he came back to New York, lived in New York City, then he took off and went to Ontario. And we're going to see a lot of this moving around in all different directions. There was an Henry N. Brush who graduated from Columbia College in New York City, and he went to Cuba. And there he met and married a lovely senorita. but he decided to bring her back to New York City. And later on, they moved up to Franklin County, New York, which is on the Canadian border. And Brushes would live there for many generations. So you can see, as I said, they're not all moving in just one generation. And here's a wonderful example of that. Alfred C. Brush, who was the father of the noted painter George DeForest Brush. Alfred started out in Connecticut. He married his wife in Ohio, then he settled in Pennsylvania, where he was a dentist. Next, he tried Tennessee. And then he came back to Danbury, Connecticut, where he got involved in hat manufacturing, which was a major industry there and one in which quite a few Connecticut brushes would work. But Alfred still couldn't settle down. He is next found in New York City, where he was a successful businessman. And then he decided to retire in Darien, Connecticut. And this is an example of one of the problems I had in trying to develop some statistics about brush migration. Just where do you count Alfred? Which state do you give him? I ended up putting him in Connecticut because he did actually spend more of his life there than he did in the other states. But you can see that when I spout these statistics that the situation actually is a little more complicated than that. Another example is Josephus Wilson Brush. He left Vermont for Indiana, which is perfectly normal. But by 1850, he was out in California during the gold rush. And then he came all the way back to Vermont to get married. After that, he served in the Civil War. And after the war, he decided to settle in Nebraska. J. Claybush was another Vermonter who went west. He went to Minnesota, and he lived there for quite a long time. But after his wife died, he accompanied his daughter out to Tacoma, Washington. And then later, he came to North Dakota to live with his son, and that's where he died. Others made more decisive moves. They went to one place and stayed there. And an example of that is Nelson Allen Brush, who was a school teacher from Franklin County, New York. He went west with his family just before the Civil War. And they left some account of their trip. They spent the winter with cousins in Illinois, and then they crossed the Mississippi to St. Louis and joined a wagon train, a train of prairie schooners, as they call them, drawn by oxen. And they ended up in Mendocino County, California. And according to their account, in their party going west were the widow and children of John Brown, who had recently been hanged at Harper's Ferry.
Nelson went there because of his passing in 1862.
Now, I mentioned several times that there were Brush families living in New York City and Brooklyn. And that deserves a bit of explanation. In those days, New York City was just the island of Manhattan. And Brooklyn was a city in its own right, and one of the largest cities in the country. When I started helping Stuart and Russell with the genealogy, I was already living in the city, and I was already becoming familiar with the city directories and other special sources that we have for doing New York City genealogy. And so I looked in these sources for brushes, and they were everywhere. Conklin Mann's article had indicated a few brushes moving into the city, but we had no idea of the flood that would follow in subsequent generations. And this is something that most of us don't realize. We think, because of what happened in the 20th century, that people leave cities, they escape into the suburbs. We're not apt to associate families like the Brushes with city folk. But if you look back to this earlier time, you find the situation reversed. After the American Revolution, as the economy revived, America's cities began to grow dramatically. And there were all kinds of opportunities that looked very appealing to young men from the farms. The construction business alone needed all kinds of workers, skilled and unskilled. And anyone with a horse and wagon could become a city cartman, making deliveries on the city streets. And if you really had ambition and talent, there was the possibility of starting up your own business and possibly making a fortune. Now, we're accustomed to thinking of the lower paid among these jobs as being taken by newly arrived immigrants. But for about 50 years after the American Revolution, there was relatively little immigration into this country. It really didn't get going on a large scale until the 1840s, when you had the Irish potato famine and the political upheaval in Germany. So During this period before that, when all these job openings were occurring in New York City and then in Brooklyn, they couldn't be filled by immigrants. They had to be filled by native-born Americans. And so people poured into the cities from the surrounding country. They came from Long Island, from the Hudson Valley, from New England, from New Jersey. And of course, these were the very areas where Brushes were living. So it's not at all surprising to find them following this trend. And if you read through the genealogy, you will see family after family coming into New York City and Brooklyn and often living there for several generations. There were also many more who only lived in the cities briefly. They may have come in and worked for a few years and then they went back to where they had come from. So if they were counted, the number who lived in the city at one time or another would be even larger. This generation shows some of the same trends that I mentioned before. We see a number of men getting into politics. One was mayor of Pittsburgh. Conklin Brush became the mayor of Brooklyn. And you find others serving in state legislatures. And I mentioned that Elkanah served in the Republic of Texas legislature. Augustus Brush served in the New York Assembly, and he later on went on to be the warden of Sing Sing Prison. You heard something about another Brush at Sing Sing Prison. There are a lot more Brushes seeing military service in this generation. We find the first Brush to graduate from West Point, John S., in 1812. He was stationed in Louisiana during the War of 1812, and he liked it so much that he stayed there. I mentioned earlier that there were Brushes on the Canadian side of the family that also served in that war. And we find two of them, Jairus Brush and his brother Benjamin, who served in the Rebellion of 1837. Now, most of us from the United States aren't going to know what the Rebellion of 1837 was. But it was a very important but unsuccessful attempt to bring a more democratic government to Canada. That was in 1837, and the Brushes were there. Another interesting Brush of this generation was Albert W. from Vermont. He went to Illinois, and after he got there, the Mexican War broke out, so he enlisted. And he went to Mexico under General Zachary Taylor, who of course later became President of the United States. After the war, Albert still wasn't ready to settle down, so he went out to the California gold fields. And there are many, 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 many more stories like this. It just goes on and on. So many examples, which you will find if you take the time to read through the genealogy. But let's move on to the 8th generation. They lived, again, mostly in the 19th century. Now there were 324 families. This is actually the largest of the generations in the genealogy. Of the 324, 22 are still living in Huntington. This is only 7% of the family. You can see how it's shrunk. There are 16 more living elsewhere in Suffolk County, 7 in Queens County, 15 in New York City, and in Kings County, which is Brooklyn, there were 24 Brush families. So Brooklyn, in fact, now has more Brushes than Huntington, and more Brushes than New York City. And there are, altogether in New York State, 84 Brush families living in the lower part of the state, 59 Brush families living upstate. They form 44% of the total family. And that's a lot of Brush families, but for the first time, you have less than half of all Brushes living in New York State. So that's another trend that's very noticeable. There's about the same percentage of Brushes as before living in Connecticut and the rest of New England, and living in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. There are now 12 families living in Canada. There are still only 6 living in the South or Southwest. That area has not yet attracted a large number of Brushes. But in the Midwest, there are now 80 Brush families. The Midwest has become home to a quarter of all the Brushes. 33 in Ohio alone, 10 in Illinois, 9 in Iowa, 7 in Michigan, 6 in Minnesota, etc. We also find 21 Brushes have now made their way further west, and half of those are in California. I've been mentioning a number of Brushes that went to California because no sooner had gold been discovered than they were on their way. Why not? And New Yorkers were especially enthusiastic about getting out there to the gold fields. Some of them, of course, did go across country by the proverbial covered wagon, but a great many from the East Coast went there by sea. They, if they were really adventurous, they took ships that went around the Horn, but many of them took ships to the Isthmus of Panama, which they crossed by horse or mule, and then caught a ship on the other side to take them to San Francisco. Some of the Brushes who went to California stayed there, and some came back. Many in the initial group that went out, of course, were single Brush men. Families followed later. At least one Brush woman went on her own, and this is an interesting story. In 1863, this is a few years after the Gold Rush, Eliza Brush Purdy of Huntington was a 45-year-old widow, and she decided to go out and see what California was all about. We know about this from an entry in the diary of Mrs. Amelia Brush of Huntington, and I noticed that someone has made a transcript of this, which is available for you to look at upstairs. But can't you see Eliza boarding a ship in New York, trekking across Panama, and sailing on to San Francisco? She only stayed there a short time, and she returned to Huntington to live on to the age of 79. So it didn't do her any harm. One Brush family that went west in this generation were the brothers John, William, and Jared from Claremont County, Ohio. And they went to Colorado. And Jared Brush left a very interesting account of their trip west. He had gone first to Sioux City, Iowa, and he stayed there for a while. And then in 1859, he and his brothers joined a wagon train, 22 covered wagons. As he said, loaded with provisions, bedding, cooking utensils, and so forth, each wagon also carrying 4 to 5 persons. And they had a guard of 8 men who rode ahead and others at the side because they were constantly on the watch for hostile Sioux Indians. And Jared remembered that as they crossed the Missouri River, he counted his cash and found that he had exactly $1.35 as capital for investment. But he also recalled that they had a wonderful time on this trip, and they made lifelong friends. And eventually, the Rocky Mountains came into view, and they settled at Boulder, Colorado. And they established a successful freight business, and Jared also established a really successful cattle ranching business. And he went on to get involved in politics and was lieutenant governor of Colorado. And the town of Brush, Colorado is named after him. So that's just, again, one of many wonderful stories that you'll find if you take the time to read through the genealogy of this generation. There are a lot of other famous people in this generation, like John Tomlinson Brush of baseball fame, and George DeForest Brush, the painter, and George Jarvis Brush, who was an eminent scientist in the 19th century, and Charles Francis Brush, whose name we've heard mentioned quite a few times already during this meeting. But read the genealogy. There's a lot more there than just names and dates and places. Many of this generation served in the Civil War, and I think if someone would take the time to go to the National Archives and dig out their compiled service records and also their pension records, we'd find a wonderful story just in this one aspect of Brush history. Because I imagine that Brushes must have served in just about every major campaign of the Civil War. They were probably present at many of the battles whose names are household words even today. But let's move on again to the 9th generation. But they didn't know anymore, you know. Okay, she was Charlotte Brush. And then one day, one of my aunts asked me if I would like to look at the old letters. And I was quite surprised. I never heard that there were any old letters. And she said, oh yes, we have some very old letters, and I think they'd be of interest to you. And so she went down into her cellar, which is where you keep old letters. And she got out this old wooden box, and it was filled with these letters from the 1850s and 1860s. And it seems that my great-grandfather Tappan, whose mother was Charlotte Brush, in the 1850s went out to Wisconsin and worked there as a mason. And after a while, he decided to come back, and he spent the rest of his life as a Long Island farmer. But during the time he was out there, letters were written back and forth, and they had saved them. And when I looked in these letters, I read all about Uncle Thomas Brush, and Uncle Stephen Brush, and Uncle John Brush, and Aunt Susan Brush, and Grandmother Brush. Well, here they were. And armed with that information, I was then able to go to the census and other documents and recreate Charlotte Brush Tappan's family. And I learned that her father was named Samuel Brush. So, of course, then I went and looked in Conklin Mann's genealogy. Samuel was born sometime in the 1770s, and he should have been in Conklin Mann's article. And there was a Samuel there who was a little young, but we thought he might be my Samuel. And if you look in the genealogy, that's where you will find my Samuel, but in fact, that is not my Samuel. To this day, I do not know where my Samuel belongs in the family, even though he was born here in Huntington. And there's another twist to this. One day, Russell Brush called me up, and he said he'd been out to Riverhead, to the county center, and he'd been looking in the deeds, and he found these two deeds made by my Samuel, in which he called himself Samuel Samus Brush. Well, Samus is another very old Huntington name. So I thought, well, this is an important lead. Maybe now I'll find the answer. What I discovered was that in the first part of his life, my Samuel was known as Samuel Samus much more often than he was known as Samuel Brush. He used both of these last names. It was only late in life that he combined them and became Samuel Samus Brush. And all of his children used the surname Brush. And I'm convinced, after going through every record that I could find over a period of over 40 years, and talking to genealogical experts, of whom I know many, I'm convinced that Samuel Samus Brush was born out of wedlock. It's a very common thing in such a situation for someone to use two names. And usually one is the name of the father, the other is the name of the mother. And I have a suspicion that something happened when Samuel Samus Brush was a little older. Maybe some of the close Brush relatives died. He might have been offended if he used the Brush name, and he now felt it was safe to use his real name and not just his mother's name. It's just a theory, and I don't know whether I'll ever find the answer. I don't know at this point who his father was, and I don't know who his mother was. But I'm fully convinced that he was a Huntington Brush. So, when you go to school and you study American history, and I'm sure this is also true of our cousins north of the border when they study Canadian history, you may not think of having a family connection to the events you're learning about. But the Brush genealogy gives you that connection. Now you can read about the settlement of the colonies, and think of Thomas and Richard and their immediate descendants who created farms out of the wilderness here on Long Island and elsewhere. When you read about people moving west, no matter which state you name, you will always find that at least one Brush went there. You can also read about the American Revolution and think of Major Jesse Brush of Huntington and all the others who fought for independence, as well as the Brushes who decided to move to Canada and remain subjects of the Crown. You can read about all the subsequent wars and know that in every one of those conflicts there were Brushes involved. There were Brushes in politics all along the way. There were Brushes in so many other aspects of life, as pioneers in many fields: religion, law, medicine, engineering, education. Each of them contributed in a small way to the big picture that is our history. Without them, we would not be here today, and this country would be a different place. It gives us a sense of belonging, I think, and some sense of pride, but it also presents us with a challenge to maintain and enhance the family heritage which they have left to us. Thank you very much.
This. You may be aware of the fact that over $1 million acres of forest burned in Colorado this summer. And news media last night, those fires are breaking out again. We really hope that, and the West, over 5 million acres now burned. Anyway, the day before we let come out here, I was thinking about how discouraged I was. Denver is full of haze. You can't see the sun days. You can't even see the sun now. The smoke. It's very discouraging. And happened to look up the afternoon before we came, and part of the winds have blown the smoke away, the haze away from the mountain peaks. So I came up with this design as a symbol of hope for the people of Colorado. The sun will shine again.
Thank you, Robert. You'll be hearing Robert tomorrow morning, and Burton also, as they share with us the scriptures from a family Bible that was printed in 1769.
I'm back.
What's that?
They're back.